These were the world's forests before human beings began to clear them. But that was thousands of years ago. Satellites help to monitor the present attacks on the woodwork of spaceship Earth. But let's assess the damage fairly. To our own ancestors, the dark backwoods seemed a challenge. To create farms, roads, and settlements, they labored to let in the light. Unfortunately for the trees, the moist, warm places where they thrive suit human beings too. Now the onslaught's like a human hurricane. Healthy forests strongly reflect infrared light. That's shown in images from the American Landsat in a false red color. This is virgin Amazon forest in 1973. And the same area in 1987, showing the human impact. When the satellites held up a new mirror to the Earth, their sensational images of forest clearances sounded an alarm about the disappearing forests. Firewood is living nature's own fuel, and people need to clear fields for growing food. And wood is a treasured material. But to judge deforestation clearly, it's as well to remember that nature itself destroys forests. Hurricanes and other storms knock down many trees each year, whether in the tropics or in England's last pitiful scraps of woodland. Natural fires, too, take out large areas of forest. This one was in China in 1987. It looks terrible, yet fire can help to refresh and renew a forest. Passing overhead, the Spot satellite saw the Chinese fire clearly. But if you take a global view of forests on a long time scale, nature doesn't seem to care very much about them. Every ice age nearly wipes out the forests by cold and drought, even far away from the sprawling ice sheets. These small green patches represent all the forests there were 18,000 years ago. When the ice melted, the forest painted huge green rings around spaceship Earth. But there have been big inroads since then. When Europeans, for instance, complain about other people's deforestation, they should remember that their ancestors wiped out most of Europe's broadleaf forests long ago, and the remaining evergreens are in mortal danger. In Finland, an expert on satellite images unleashed a scandal when he used Landsat to reveal the surreptitious disposal of forests near the Russian border. The black patches represent cleared areas. But air pollution is the chief menace in Europe. A Landsat image shows the German-Czechoslovak border region. German experts decoded it to display fairly healthy forests in green. Here, the red is for danger, a once-loved forest crippled by air pollution. Scientists are slowly learning how forests function in spaceship Earth's life support system. The trees interact with the weather and climate. They absorb solar heat. They slow down the wind. They suck carbon dioxide out of the air and stockpile it as wood. Most of the world's species of plants and animals have their refuge in the forests that survive. Some experts suggest that several species a day are being lost through present deforestation. That's only a wild guess, but with modern technology, human beings can oppress these life forms mindlessly, like a human ice age. People need the forests more than nature does to keep the planet the way they like it. For instance, a forest is an umbrella and a sponge that checks the force of a rainstorm. It moderates some floods and dry winds and protects the soil. And by pumping water from the soil into the air, vegetation helps to make more rain. Computers can now model these interactions of forests and weather. The results imply that to destroy a large forest might cut a region's rainfall to a point of no return. Human beings won't leave the forests alone. They can't afford to. But maybe they'll use forests more shrewdly and safely if they understand them better. How? Well, one road to knowledge and understanding is by controlled experiments with forests. A famous place for those is tucked in the northern corner of the United States, in New Hampshire. The White Mountains National Forest is not as nature intended. American Indians and European settlers altered it, and much of the present forest reoccupies former farmland. The giant evergreens that dominated the skylines mostly went for firewood long ago. As for animals, the moose are harder to find than the skiers. Their ski runs size through the forest like a highway paved with snow. As it grows crowded, there are demands for another. Well-to-do visitors want all the conveniences of city life out in the wild. And while the U.S. Forest Service tries to cater wisely for the many users of the White Mountains, it can't protect its trees from polluted air. Poisons drift in from distant smokestacks and from the cars of the visitors. They yellow the needles of the remaining evergreens, like this venerable red spruce. Logging continues, but only in certain parts of the forest. Modern methods of logging mean that the entire tree is removed. No lopped-off branches are left to refertilize the soil. The forest's bloodstream is the water. It's the means of exploiting the energy of sunlight and using the nutrients in the soil. If you disturb the forest, the chemistry of the water changes. This is Hubbard Brook. It gives its name to an experimental forest in the White Mountains. Here, in a natural bowl, different streams drain clearly defined sections of the forest. Each can be altered in a different way to see what happens. The experimenters stripped this tract bare several years ago, and there's a slender new growth. The scientists can comment on the effects of commercial forestry. At a deeper level, they tinker with the forest to analyze how it works. They leave part of it completely alone. Here, they let trees fall from old age and return their chemical elements to the humus. Uprooting the dead trees is nature's way of plowing the forest soil. Sugar maple, American beech, yellow birch. These broadleaf trees predominate over evergreens at Hubbard Brook. The seeds of other species wait patiently for a forest fire or a strong wind to kill the dominant trees and grant them a sight of the sunlight. One such opportunist is the pin cherry, and when the scientists imitated a hurricane by toppling all the trees in this tract of the forest, the pin cherry flourished in the aftermath along with other trees and bushes. By disturbing a forest now and again, nature maintains the diversity of species. A quarter of a century after the simulated hurricane at Hubbard Brook, the dominant trees begin to reassert themselves. Scientific insight comes especially from the water that runs off each experimental tract or watershed. Granite under the forest floor prevents the water escaping underground. Each stream tells a chemical story. Experimenters can link it to their records of temperature and sunshine, rainfall and air pollution, and to their alterations of the forest. When trees fall, the forest bleeds, and for a time more water runs off, and it carries away unused nutrients. Bacteria in the soil work overtime to grab essential nitrogen from the air, but much of it washes away downstream. A sample of water from a piece of the forest that's slowly regenerating itself after complete clearance. The forest needs many years to restock itself with all the chemical elements it lost, and the researchers must work in the same patient rhythm. Long-term ecological research like this is all too rare. The forests help to regulate the chemistry of the entire planet. Yet to learn about all the different kinds of forests and how human disturbances affect them might need dozens of ecological observatories like Hubbard Brook. Analytical chemistry is not the only way to know and understand the forests better. What about the people who live in them? They acquire local expertise by long experience, and nowhere longer than in Australia, in the rainforest of Queensland. History, reckoned in centuries, seems misty enough. The imagination boggles at the 50,000 years since the Australian Aborigines discovered their island continent. Those who settled in the rainforest thrived by learning every species of plant and animal. They had plenty of time to evolve, and they became shorter in stature than Aborigines living in less dense and tangled parts of Australia. Some of their descendants try to preserve their formidable tradition and its rituals. But today they don't dance to the spirits of the forest. The universal tourist comes from around the world to glimpse a strange and disappearing culture. Their dollars help this Aboriginal community to spend time and effort in the ancestral forest, which otherwise has no place in the economy of modern Australia. It's a slender thread, and they know it.
Breathing right. Make sounds.
In the name of progress, young Aborigines come to terms with the modern world. Who needs to know the best wood for spears when people want furniture? Knowing every nut and fruit of the forest can fill your belly, but not your wage packet. The spirits of electricity and internal combustion drive out remembrance of the strangler fig and the right bait for turtle. The stringy bark hut gives way to modern housing. Aborigines who fear they're losing their roots in their own land attempt to keep one foot on the concrete and the other on the floor of their ancestral bush.
My ancestors from this bush, they used to do a lot of traveling just in the bush. This is what they used to live on. This is part of their home, and this is how they taught us that we should never turn away from the rainforest, because this is our home, it's their home, and it is up to us to look back at it and use it wisely. The spirits are in the trees, the leaves, the waters, the creeks. In this tree holds a lot of their spirits, and if you're just walking through the track about evening time, you'd actually hear their spirits calling out to you and saying, this is your home and this is where you belong.
The spirits grow fainter with every year that passes. The dream fades. In an oral culture free of books, human voices from generation to generation preserved for 500 centuries the thread of Aboriginal knowledge. If the thread snaps now, the forest will at best become a protected enclave, a deserted museum to be picked over by botany students, perhaps trying to rediscover the special foods, medicines and materials known only to the rainforest Aborigines. At worst, no one will care what happens to the forest. In other areas of the tropical world, the human hurricane has raged almost unchecked. Thailand has lost large areas of forest in the last 20 years. The government has tried to stop it, but data from a US weather satellite shows in red an area 400 kilometers wide near Thailand's border with Laos that has lost its forest. In Africa, too, the rainforest is fading away. Faster, in fact, than in any other continent. The world's largest tropical forest is in the Amazon basin, mostly in Brazil. Observations of its destruction from the air and from space caused a crescendo of concern worldwide. Powerful commercial interests have dealt ruthlessly with the trees and with the traditional inhabitants of the forest, the American Indians. The fate of the Amazon forests has been closely monitored by satellites. Here, the surviving forest is shown green in a spot image. Cleared areas are discolored, and just 3 years later, they were much bigger. Special processing of the images makes the destruction even more apparent. But it shouldn't be exaggerated. The Amazon forest is huge, larger than Europe, and in a mosaic of Landsat images, the black clearances make limited inroads into the grey forest. Using hundreds of images, space scientists judge that only 7% of the forest in Brazil has been lost. The whole of Spain and Portugal could easily fit into the remaining forest in this region alone. Another large hole in the Brazilian forest. There's no denying that it's taken severe punishment lately, from miners as well as from farmers and loggers. Yet despite all the destruction, the verdict from the satellites is that Brazil's forests are certainly not past saving. With prudent management, the forest will always be a generous source of timber and other products. And if further clearances for ranching and farming seem unavoidable, a little intelligence can avoid unnecessary destruction and waste. People need land and sources of income, but the human species is also one of many that needs the forests. The only way to solve the riddle of the forests may be by careful geographical study, case by case and place by place. That's just what the World Bank asked for in Bolivia, across the border from Brazil. In an image from the Landsat spacecraft, the red area is forested. The blue shows where the forest has almost disappeared from a large area in the province of Santa Cruz. The city of Santa Cruz, a sleepy place for 400 years, is now the thriving capital of Bolivia's new frontier, which is turning the western edge of the Amazon forest into farmland. The pioneers throng from all around the world. Mennonites bring to the forest their Bibles and their strict puritanical beliefs. American Indians escaped from the poverty of the Andes. Farmers come here from Japan's crowded islands, and from India, a turbaned Sikh starts a new life in Bolivia. The land they've come to win carries dry tropical forest. Not a true rainforest here, but moist enough to grow crops. The Bolivian government drives dirt roads into the wilderness and sells blocks of land cheaply to the farmers. They have to get rid of the trees by their own efforts. The lucky ones can bring in bulldozers, and some of their clearances cover several square kilometers. The new fields are quite big enough to stand out plainly in images from space. Bolivia's own remote sensing experts use the images in judging the long-term prospects for agriculture in the forests of Santa Cruz province. They find themselves cast as the conscience of the world. Their independent team, called CUMAT, was commissioned to advise the World Bank on whether further development is a good idea. One of the Landsat images shows what can go wrong. These man-made sand dunes are big enough to be seen from space. During the last 100 years, mining companies raided forests in the region, felling the trees for timber and fuel. The strong winds lifted the dry, unprotected soil and swept it into dunes. It mustn't happen again. Although Bolivia is very poor, it uses satellite images more purposefully than many other richer countries. Landsat generated this survey of a large piece of Bolivia's forests and farms in just 30 seconds. To be sure of what the image means, the scientists visit selected areas on the ground. This is soybean country now. The legume does very well here, but the vagaries of the market and good farming practice may both call for other crops. Can the soil of the former forest withstand the expected demands? Here it's not too acidic, unlike some of the region's soil. But what is its capacity for moisture? Will it resist wind erosion? How healthy is the present vegetation? The Kumat team puts together the information from ground studies and space images in a computerized mapping system. Patterns of streams are crucial for assessing different zones in the forest. So are soil types. There's no simple answer. Farm or don't farm. Some parts of the forest terrain are fragile and ought to be safeguarded. Other zones should be able to yield crops indefinitely, given suitable precautions against wind erosion. And as for preserving the forest at any cost, well, some of the largest clearances in Bolivia are those of the Mennonites. There's a time warp here. These people speak Old Dutch. They still prefer horses to machines, although they use bulldozers for clearing the forest. The Mennonite farmers in Bolivia are little different from the hard-working Puritans 2 centuries back, who drove their plows and buggies through the backwoods of Pennsylvania at the birth of the USA. If this deforestation is a sin, then so was that. When genuine human needs lie behind assaults on the trees, they must be judged with knowledge and understanding. Only the best research will do to confront powerful interests when it's greed that motivates the inroads. More clearly than any other part of the planet, the forests illustrate the need to reconcile the global with the local point of view. That's easier said than done. The clearances can be fatal for those who live in the forest. But when the satellites hold up their mirror to the planet, here's the riddle. Many people now live prosperously in regions that lost their forests long ago. By what right can they deny others who simply want to follow their example in the tropical forests of spaceship Earth?
A special supplement on Spaceship Earth appeared in a recent edition of the Geographical magazine. For a copy, send a cheque or postal order for £1.50, payable to Channel 4, to Spaceship Earth, P.O. Box 4000, London W3.
We'd lost 12 feet then, within that time. And then yesterday at 4 o'clock, of course, the rest of the house is just on the base, on the edge of it.
This woman is about to lose her home. Her property has fallen victim to the greatest power on Earth, the sea.
I wouldn't give permission for it to be demolished there.
Since the family moved in less than 2 years ago, the sea has advanced by more than 60 feet. The last telephone conversation confirms that there can be no reprieve.
No, nothing. No. Yeah.
The 4-bedroom house they bought for £76,000 is now worth nothing. The land will soon be gone. There'll be no compensation. The dream of retirement by the sea is shattered. The fight to hold back the sea has never been more urgent. Britain has more than 10,000 kilometres of coastline, and we've spent thousands of millions of pounds protecting it. But all along the south and east coast, the sea is still advancing, and new measures are needed quickly if it's to be held back. In some areas, it is already too late. The home of the Liddell family at Southwold in Suffolk has gone. In a few months, the sea will even claim the rubble.
It's a lifetime's work, just reduced to rubble.
For a proud householder, the plot evokes memories of happier times.
We're going through the front door now, and this is the hall. And down here further towards the back of the house is the kitchen, where you could also overlook the sea. The bedroom was right next door to the toilet. This was the guest bedroom over here in this corner.
Just coming back now and looking at all this wreckage must put a lump in your throat, I guess.
Very much so, yes, yes.
It was a lovely home, spacious, and had a lot of potential. Needed a little bit of work done into it, but it would have been fine for us for the rest of the time until we get retirement.
The call of the sea has always drawn people to the coast. But it was the spread of the railways and excursions for the working classes which put it within everyone's reach. An annual holiday for workers was introduced at the turn of the century, and with the development of holidays with pay, seaside towns boomed. At peak periods, hundreds of thousands of holiday makers invaded the resorts, and populations all along the coast increased dramatically. In the balmy summers before the Great War, new towns sprang up as close to the sea as possible to attract the holidaymakers and their money. In turn, many holidaymakers decided the seaside was the ideal place to live. But seaside towns were often built on totally unsuitable areas of the coast. Hearn Bay in Kent, for example, built by a Victorian entrepreneur. It's cost millions ever since to stop it being washed away. All along the coast, houses with a sea view were soon appearing.
Thousand little stars, we can decorate the ceiling with an optimistic feeling. We can build a little home. Every single little dream is a shingle or a rafter. We can paint the house with laughter when we build a little home. It's not a palace, nor a poorhouse, but the rent is absolutely free. This is my house, but it's your house, if you'll come and live with me. With a carpet on the floor, made of buttercups and clover, all our troubles will be over when we build a little home.
In the 12th century, 4,000 people lived here in Dunwich, the capital of East Anglia. Now all that remains is to the right of the dotted line on this model. The rest has been claimed by the sea. Even the few Victorian houses still here are at risk today. It's one of the most stunning examples of the sea's power on the coastline of England.
What has been happening is that steadily it's been going piecemeal. Some years they may have been losing 6, 7, 8 metres of land as the cliffs crumbled away. Other times they might have gone for 10 years with no erosion at all. On an average, over 700 years, they've lost a metre of land a year.
How much of the town has gone then?
The whole of it. There's none of it left now. What we've got out here where the sea's breaking now, that was where the town was.
Cliff falls in the last few days have opened up the graveyard of All Saints' Church, the last of the 15 medieval churches here to sink under the waves. Even in 1991, it seems that the sea still wants the very last residents of Dunwich for its own. In 1953, history very nearly repeated itself. The east of England was swamped. More than 300 people died and over 30,000 were made homeless.
Well, the map of eastern England at this moment has been changed. The familiar curve of East Anglia, the estuaries, the Thames-mouth islands, firm enough lines in your atlas, now have no boundaries but at the will of the sea. But at Canvey Island, it starts to come home, this business in its sinister terror. Neat rows of houses, people's homes, awash. The grey, brown, swilling waters lap and swirl round a centre of life that has so clearly been stricken dead. I'm sorry if this sounds emotional. You can't see what I've seen today and give a neat, concise account as though it was some stage-managed news affair in a tidy frame. This has been an upheaval of nature, the sort of thing we see on the films, and it's happened here in England on the doorstep of London. This isn't a pretty bit of scenery, but it's the end of people's homes, the end of their way of living, and in many cases, the end of their lives.
After the floods of 1953, Britain embarked on a major coastal protection programme. Hard sea walls were built to stop such a disaster happening again. But nearly 40 years later, many of these defences are in a state of disrepair. The town of Hearn Bay was badly hit. It was protected then, and has been ever since, by sea walls, giving the promenade much of its character. But all that is to change.
Right here in Hearn Bay, classic case of hard defences which have failed. You've only got to look at the defences. They're tired, they're falling to pieces. And here we're planning a rock revetment as a principal method of defence. Now that's going to be about 400 metres off the shore. Inshore will be a shingle beach, and it won't be as pebbly as this shingle beach. It'll be finer because it's protected by the rock revetment. This will then form something like a natural embayment, and we should be able to have a small boat harbour within it.
This new approach is also popular with organisations concerned at protecting areas at risk from defences which are little short of eyesores.
The engineering solutions are being seen to not be effective. A lot of the current engineering solutions were built in response to the 1953 floods and were done after a major disaster. And I think a lot of people now recognise that perhaps too many built structures were put in place and not enough was done to build up the natural defences, the shingle banks and dune systems.
The seawalls do have their place. They're needed to protect the valuable assets of towns. And here in North Norfolk we've got places like Cromer, Sheringham, Bacton, Munsley, Overstrand, where really erosion of the coast can't be tolerated because we've been losing houses, homes, other premises which are very valuable.
Seawalls cause several problems. Normally the sea will erode a cliff, causing sediment to fall onto the beach. This sediment then helps to keep the beach replenished, and the waves and currents take the surplus sand around the coast, helping to nourish other beaches. Building a wall stops the erosion, but cuts off the supply of sand, not only to its own beach, but also to the rest of the coast, possibly causing problems elsewhere. With nothing to replenish the beach, the sea's natural action soon strips it of its sand. With the sand gone, the wall's foundations are exposed and undermined, and the wall collapses. Nearly a quarter of the coastline of England and Wales is protected by hard defences, usually concrete walls. But new thinking is moving back to the oldest ideas of all, and these have been practised on the other side of the North Sea for 500 years. The Dutch used windmills to drain their land, much of it reclaimed from the sea. They've even made their drainage works and dikes a feature of their landscapes. But half of Holland is below sea level, and even the capital, Amsterdam, is constantly threatened by flooding. The Dutch turned to nature. They realised that the best protected parts of their coastline had sand dunes. So where there weren't any dunes, they built them, huge piles of sand. They're so strong they've even built their towns right behind them. In some places, the dunes are hundreds of yards wide.
Holland is a deep playing country. At a lot of places some meters below sea level. So if you don't have sea defense, you don't have a country. And you can't live here. More than 50% of this country is floodable if you don't have dikes and dunes. And that's the part of the country where the most people are living, where the biggest part of our national product is produced. It's the most important part of our country. It's the area between Rotterdam, The Hague and Amsterdam. It's complete laying in that low area. There are three things here in Holland. As a sandy coast is one integrated morphological system. A system of water, waves, tides and sand. To protect it against erosion, you need an integrated approach, and that's the best from the central level. Second, it costs a lot of money, and that's the best way to get that money is out of the central government. And third, you need a good quality level of dikes and dunes.
To maintain the dunes, there's a continual programme to return 2 million cubic metres of sand each year to the beaches. The sand is scraped from Holland's estuaries by the largest fleet of dredgers in the world. And all this work is simply to help Holland maintain its present coastline. The dredging operation alone costs the Dutch government £20 million a year. The dunes need renewing every 6 years. Britain has natural dunes on some stretches of the east coast. These at Holcombe and North Norfolk stretch for miles and may be one solution to our coastal defences.
Well, the marvellous thing about this part of the coastline is that, first of all, it has these very extensive intertidal sandy flats. And from these sandy flats, when the wind is blowing from the east, the sand will accumulate, first of all, as embryo dunes at the top of the beach, and then the marram grass will bind the sand together, and slowly the dunes will accumulate, so that we have a whole series of dune ridges here. And they are actually a marvellous defence against the sea, against high tide, against extreme water levels, against storm surges. The sand will actually mend itself or repair itself. If hard sea defences were built, it would of course interfere with the supply of sediment. And if you cut down the supply of sediment, then the way in which the dunes will repair themselves is considerably reduced. So that by cutting off or reducing the supply of sediment, you guarantee that the dunes will actually erode and will be severely damaged. With a bit of help, that is planting marram grass or thatching the dunes, you will ensure that they will retain a marvellous defence against rising sea level.
The National Rivers Authority, or NRA, are responsible for the defences on Britain's beaches. Further down the coast, near Eccles, they're working to save a beach. If the sea breaks through here, it'll swamp low-lying farmland and lead to the destruction of Norfolk's most famous asset, the Broads.
The NRA is a great supporter of soft defences. That's the way that we have to go for the future, working with nature rather than against. And our sea defence management study, which will be completed later this year, looks at the whole of our coastline on an integrated basis. Looks at the sea, looks at the tides, looks at the currents, looks at the sediment transport, so that we can design and look at natural defences. We're already building one at Hunstanton on the Wash. 8 kilometres of beach there is being replaced to provide an effective flood defence. And what you see here today is effectively a semi-soft defence. These hard rocks break the wave energy rather than reflecting the wave energy, which is the problem you get with a hard defence like sheet piling and concrete sea wall. We've got nearly 1,000 miles of defences that we maintain along our coastline. We're currently putting £25 million a year along the Anglian coastline into sea defences. We really need to put something in the order of £35 million a year to protect this coastline effectively in the longer term. That's ignoring the problem of greenhouse effect, global warming and sea level rise.
Well, I'm not a technician and I wouldn't like to argue on the technical thing, except that it does seem to me that the hard defences that we've had in the past have not stood the test of time. That's one of the reasons we're spending so much money, because of the breakdown in defences which were put after the great floods in the early 50s. I also think that you ought to work with nature. And I don't believe that these beaches were placed here by accident. It seems to me that they have a role to play, and therefore the idea of replenishing beaches as a protection to the harder defence beyond seems to be very sensible. The Dutch are doing it widely, we're doing it now here very widely, and I'm sure that's going to be the answer. We've got to make these defences last longer, or we really will be in for very huge figures every year. I'm spending £234 million on coastal defences over these next 3 years, and of that the Ministry is providing 2/3. And a great deal of the extra, of course, is very much supported by local taxation, both district and council and county council. So you are talking about huge sums, and we ought to spend it carefully and sensibly.
But there's now a growing belief that this amount of money falls far short of what's needed to hold back the sea. There are new problems just ahead, brought about by our changing climate. Professor Keith Clayton, head of the University of East Anglia's Environmental Science Department, has been monitoring the increase in sea levels.
The annual rate of rise is going to go up to about 6 millimetres a year, and it's only just over 1 at the moment. So sea level is going to be rising more quickly than now, and all the problems we have at the coast at the moment, erosion, the loss of beaches in front of sea walls, all those problems are going to get very much worse. So although it's not a disaster scenario, it's going to be very serious, and we're going to have to plan quite carefully to cope with it properly.
But Professor Clayton's predictions are wrong, according to another academic, Dr. Michael Tooley. He believes a disaster is at hand, and it may well be too late to do anything about it.
If you bear in mind that the measured rise of sea level over the past 100 years or so has been between 1 and 1.5 millimetres per year, in the past, associated with the catastrophic melting of ice caps, particularly over Canada, sea level rose by between 35 and 45 millimetres per year. Now, there is no question about that. That is what has been measured, not only in the British Isles, but also in Denmark, in the United States of America, and also in China. Enormous volumes of water were released back as the result of the melting of ice, were released back into the world's oceans. In one area in Canada, 83,000 cubic kilometres of water were released in possibly a few days or a few years. The last remaining ice caps on the Earth are Greenland and particularly Antarctica. And there is one area in Antarctica, the West Antarctic ice cap, which is a marine ice cap. It is grounded below sea level. It is very similar to the Laurentide ice cap, which we know melted catastrophically. And if that was to melt, sea level would rise by 5 meters, unevenly over the Earth, but it would rise by, on average, 5 meters. So there is that potential, and it would be accomplished in a very short period of time, measured possibly in a period between 100 and perhaps as much as 200 years. Bear in mind that there are nearly 750,000 hectares in this country below 5 meters. The impact would be enormous, and of course we could not build sea embankments to resist that rise of sea level, and therefore we would have to adopt, if you like, another option, and that is to withdraw from coastal lowlands and leave them to nature conservation.
Dr. Tooley predicts that the face of eastern England could change forever in the next 200 years. The North Sea will breach our defences and flood inland, engulfing towns and villages. Thousands of acres will disappear, including some of Britain's most valuable farmland. Cambridge will be by the sea. Canterbury Cathedral will find itself with superb views across the Channel. Ely will once more be an island, and central London will disappear beneath the rapidly rising River Thames. The Thames barrier will simply not be able to cope with the rise of more than 15 feet. But Professor Clayton is not impressed by Dr. Tooley's theory. He's still confident of his own research.
Oh yes, he's wrong and I'm right. I mean, and I'm not right because I hadn't have thought of this. There's been an international study of future sea level rise by the Inter-Parliamentary Committee on Climate Change, and that's put forward a synthesis which 95% of scientists now accept, which is a future global warming scenario of 2 or 3 degrees by the middle of the next century, and a sea level rise of something like 30 centimetres by halfway through the next century.
Whatever the exact amount of the rise in sea level, the one certain fact is that it will rise. More cliffs will collapse, and millions of pounds worth of property will be threatened. But whatever the dangers, many people still want to live as close to the sea as possible. Professor Clayton believes we may have to take a different attitude in future, and the decisions will be difficult ones to make.
We must be prepared to let cliffs erode. We must be prepared to let some small villages and small areas of farmland flood occasionally. At Salthouse, for example, on the North Norfolk coast, they're flooded quite frequently. It would cost several £1 million to defend half a dozen houses. Far better either to rebuild those houses higher up the slope or to compensate the people who live in them for the occasional discomfort of flooding. They get a slight flooding every couple of winters. They get serious flooding every 15 years. It would be possible to compensate people, and if they didn't think the compensation was worthwhile, you could compensate them to move and demolish the houses.
When it comes to people telling us that we should move from our village and that we're not going to be protected, or that we're not worth protecting, because we are worth protecting, and so is the whole village, and so is the whole coastline. I think another angle is that there are too many bodies looking after the coastline, actually. If we had one organisation responsible for the whole of the coastline around the British Isles, I think that more money would be channeled into one fund and we would probably get something done.
There are more than 240 different authorities looking after our coast. The Minister of Agriculture, John Gummer, has a coastal constituency in Suffolk and knows well the arguments for central control.
Because we're the land-based ministry, we're responsible for the land, we look after all the protection from flood, whether it's inland or at the sea. But of course, we do it through the National Rivers Authority, the NRA, on the one hand, and the local authorities where they have the duty. And I think it's right to get that balance between the centre and the local. We make sure that the thing is coordinated, that the thing is done properly, that the standards are right. The NRA makes sure that the national plan for protection is drawn up in a proper way, and the local authority feeds in the local knowledge. And my goodness, local knowledge is necessary, and local priorities are necessary. So I think it works very well. I don't see any reason for a jumbo authority dictating from Whitehall. I'd hate that. The fact is that when you buy a house, you really do have to make sure that it isn't likely to fall over the edge of the sea, and this kind of information is readily available in all these coastal areas, and in the case, for example, locally, where some houses have been allowed to fall into the sea, that was a decision of the local authority.
12 years ago, the Rother District Council in East Sussex refused to protect this house and others at Fairlight near Hastings. But now there is a defence, because local residents clubbed together to fight for it. They won, and now they have a barrier protecting their village. The argument they had to make was a long and complicated one, involving the value of their properties and land. They needed expert advice, because there were few pointers to help them along the way.
Initially, the report that came out in 1987 probably wasn't as accurate as it should have been. And over a period of time, it was examined by experienced people that fortunately live in the village. We had a quantity surveyor, an accountant, 2 lawyers, and also, fortunately, a civil servant that was very experienced in cost-benefit appraisal. One has to, first of all, determine the rate of erosion that's taking place and get the ministry officials to accept it. You've got to do an accurate appraisal of property, of gas, electricity, water. If those things were engulfed by coastal erosion, what would it cost to replace them? The cost of the scheme has got to equate with what it saves in terms of values. I think that's a fair policy, both for the people concerned and for the rest of Britain's taxpayers. We had to prove that the benefit to the nation was greater than the cost of the scheme.
And you proved that?
We proved that conclusively, yes. Oh, yes.
Plans announced by Norfolk County Council in the last few days are aimed at preventing problems like those at Fairlight in the future. They're seeking approval from the Department of the Environment to ban all building within 75 metres of the sea. The plan will need backing from the district councils which give planning permission in the coastal zone if it is to succeed. But it is seen as a bold step forward.
Planning permissions granted, say, 5 years ago for a detailed permission can be built at any time. There's no way in which we can prevent that happening. But I think anybody with a planning permission within a very short space of distance from the top of the cliff will be aware of the problems themselves. They'll be asking questions themselves. Now, we are there to guide them and give them as much information as we can as to the current state of play with that part of the coast. If they proceed, of course, the responsibility is still theirs to proceed or not. Now, what we intend to do in the future is take a rather more positive line than that and incorporate in our district-wide local plan a policy which guides people specifically away from sensitive areas of the coast which may be prone to subsidence or landslip. And I think to set up that sort of dialogue with landowners in the future will be a very positive thing for planning to do.
Because there is contradictory advice about the safety of cliffs and the future of coastal land, estate agents face extra responsibilities in advising clients both buying and selling.
If we're asked a particular question about a site or a property, then we will do what we can to find out, without going to too great a depth, if there are any problems. And if we know of any, then we shall disclose them, because we have a duty to disclose anything that we're aware of. Now, we have a site at Bacton where it is apparently thought to be subject to a risk from the sea. As far as we're concerned, we have checked with the authorities, and the site owner checked with them as well, with the Norfolk District Council, and it was given a clean bill of health. So I'm not sure what it is we should be warning them of.
Even when every warning is given, some people do not want to heed the advice. This is Christine Bowden and her husband have just moved into a small bungalow at Overstrand in North Norfolk. It's less than 60 feet from the edge of the cliff, which is collapsing. Neighbouring properties have already gone over the edge.
We owned a corner shop, which we've been fortunate enough to sell, but we'd lost a lot of money, so this was all we could afford. I mean, we considered buying a mobile home, but we couldn't afford that. We didn't have enough for that. And obviously, selling a business, we were both going to be unemployed, so we couldn't take on a mortgage or anything. So this was the best thing to do, we thought. The surveyors, the council, our solicitors made inquiries, and they came back and advised us that everybody said we really shouldn't buy anything this close, but we didn't have much of a choice really. We've got normal house insurance, but obviously it doesn't cover subsidence, cliff fall. Hopefully it'll stay with us and give us, you know, a decent life here. And it's a beautiful spot. It's just a gamble.
In the last few days, the cliffs in the south and east of England have begun falling again.
Two local radio programmes will be taking up some of the issues raised in that programme tomorrow morning. BBC Radio Kent will be reporting on coastal protection in the county at just after 9 o'clock. And on BBC Radio Norfolk, you can give your views to a phone-in on Countywide at 11 o'clock.
Constantly moving, constantly changing, the human face is a sophisticated communication system.
Tomorrow, a journey into the looking glass.
What does it mean to own ourselves? To own our own face?
Perhaps technology has its own answers.
Because if you get too far away from the basic shape, then the recognition factor's gone.
Arena appears behind the mask in the human face tomorrow.
Now on BBC Two, we look at the people in the threatened area of West Africa, whose survival is a matter of life on the edge.
A region at risk. This is the Sahel region south of the Sahara, and it's in danger of turning into a desert. Here in Burkina Faso, the old people remember a time when things were very different.
Years ago, the grass grew very tall, but now there's no grass and no forest either.
Years ago, the forest was thick and we grew a lot of corn. But now it doesn't rain so much and the land has become a desert. It has got gradually worse over the last 50 years. Before, when we had a good rainy season, we could clear the land, sow some millet and have a good harvest. But now, if the rains don't come, we get a poor harvest.
The long period of drought in the region and the disastrous effect this can have on food crops means that people here are living on the very edge of survival. In all the countries of the Sahel region, there's a long dry season when people and animals are most at risk. It can last up to 8 or 9 months with hardly a drop of rain. During this time, nearly all the rivers dry up completely. It's a tough place to live in. To survive here, people really have to know what they're doing. But even the nomadic tribes, like the Tuaregs, who've lived and moved around these regions for centuries, are now finding these long periods of drought are making life more difficult for them and for their animals. Sidi Mohammed is a Tuareg tribesman.
It hasn't rained heavily in this region for 15 years. Although last year, when it did rain, we got a plague of insects. But for 15 years, there's been lack of rain. A few places have had some, but most of us got nothing. We're beginning to lose our strength, and we have started eating the leaves off the trees. The land is being ruined. The most serious thing is the lack of rain.
The nearest source of water to the Tuareg encampment is about 4 kilometers away. It's the job of the women and children to go and fetch it. We're now over 6 months into the dry season. The water here, which collected during the last rainy season, is getting dangerously low. Simi is one of the Tuareg chiefs.
We have a mud hole near here where we collect water. The hole fills up in the rainy season, and the women go there for as long as it lasts. We bring the water all the way back here. It's our only source of water until it's all gone. Then we wait for the rains to come again. The dry season has been very hot. We've lost 7 goats already. At times like this, when water is in demand, the women go 4 times a day to the water hole. The hot season makes it difficult for them. The last 2 months of the dry season are the worst.
The long periods of drought are not much of a problem to camels, but they have to eat, and the effect of the drought on vegetation is serious. The fodder they need to live on begins to wither away, so even the camels are now coming under stress.
Even for the camels, it's a problem, because it hasn't rained and so there is hardly any fodder for them. Now, unless the herd of cows can find fodder, they will die. They will go anywhere to find it. They're getting desperate. That's the situation.
Breeding animals plays an important part in the Tuareg way of life, and camel's milk is an essential source of food. Ibrahim looks after the camels.
Camels are very useful to us in many ways. First of all, they give us milk, but we can also take them to market and exchange them for food. If we run out of millet, the people looking after the camels will take one to market and exchange it for the food we need. We Tuaregs are very good at bargaining, and we usually make a profit.
The Tuaregs now need to sell a camel in order to get money to buy food. It will take some hard bargaining before they'll agree on a price. They need the money to buy fresh supplies of millet. They don't grow that themselves. Millet is a cereal which they use to make flour. It's a basic food in the region, and they all depend on it. They also depend on another natural resource, wood, for cooking. It's this dependence on wood for fuel which is causing serious damage to the environment. The trees protect the vegetation beneath and help to retain moisture. When trees are removed, shrubs and grasses become parched. After a long drought, much of the vegetation withers away. And there's another problem. As people in the area have become less nomadic, the land around the villages is used more intensively. When the grazing near the village is finished, the animals have to go further afield. So the vegetation is eaten as fodder over a wider area. Stripped of both trees and vegetation, the soil is now open to wind and erosion. Gradually, the land turns to desert. Enormous areas of the Sahel are now at risk. This process of desertification is happening in Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, Chad, and northern Nigeria. Here in the northwest of Burkina Faso, in the province of Yatanga, the problem is serious and whole communities are at risk. As village communities grow, the land around the village has to be more intensively cultivated for food. And as more and more land is taken over for growing crops, there's less grazing land nearby for animals. With a growing population, the natural resources of the region are stretched to their limits. Lamin is 17 and lives in the village of Mompelgin. He looks after the family's herd of goats, and he has to decide where they go to graze. Goats aren't fussy about what they eat or where they eat, and Lamin has to keep a careful watch on them.
The goats will destroy all kinds of crops. If you have a few goats, then you've got to keep them tied up. And if you have a lot, someone has to watch over them. Otherwise, they'll get into the fields and eat the crops.
The people who raise animals and those who grow crops have both put terrific pressure on the land. The victim of all this pressure is the soil itself. As the vegetation is removed, the thin topsoil is exposed. If the soil is overworked, it loses its ability to hold moisture. The result is erosion. When the rains do come, they're both a blessing and a curse, for the rain which makes arid land green is also a destructive force, and soils that have taken a century to form can be washed away in a season.
If it rains really hard, there's a lot of damage and the topsoil gets washed away. This leaves the ground very hard afterwards. There's only a thin topsoil, and when that's gone, it's just hard ground underneath. If you dig the ground before sowing, you find rock near the surface, and it's not good for growing things.
In a harsh environment like this, food becomes precious and has to be protected. Village people keep their grain under lock and key. They make their granaries as difficult to get into as possible for people as well as animals. Food reserves have to be carefully rationed during the dry season until the next harvest. The last harvest was attacked by locusts in the fields, so there's much less millet than in other years.
We've only 60 days' food left in store. The locusts have eaten nearly everything we have sown. There isn't much left. They're a terrible pest and we can't stop them. I've been told that years ago there were thick forests around here with wild animals. The seed in the ground produced a good harvest. I've heard there were trees covered in fruit that you could pick and eat. But it doesn't rain as much as it used to, and all the trees are dying.
Here, farmland can change into desert incredibly quickly. Once the topsoil has gone, there are very few plants that can survive in this wasteland. The effects of desertification have been studied for several years by Bernard Lidea.
The earth is now nearly completely bare, stripped by locusts or animals or man. When the land is exposed, the rain comes and falls directly on it. The rain falls harder and harder, sometimes torrential rain. And it destroys the soil. It washes the soil away, all our arable land. Now we are left with a useless land, which hardly produces anything. The dangers of desertification are first of all the threat of famine. When people are hungry, they'll think of going somewhere else, where there is a reasonable chance of finding food. When there's no water, animals have to leave or they'll die. When the grass and the trees have no water, when desertification has taken over the whole country, then people will leave. The men you saw working in the fields, they don't want to leave, and they'll do everything to stay.
Aware of the risk of huge numbers of people moving away, Bernard Lidea has encouraged the local people to try and find practical ways of preventing desertification and of preserving what little water there is. One way is to build dams, which will create reservoirs during the rainy season. But the greatest problem is to control the destructive force of the rainwater itself. They found a simple but effective way of doing it. First, they have to work out which way the water will flow, which they do by marking the contours on the ground. To find out where the contours are, they use the simple principle that water always finds its own level. They have a long piece of plastic tubing filled with water. The two ends are attached to two posts, each of which has a measuring scale marked alongside the tubes. When the levels on each post are the same, it means they found another point along the contour. And now they can mark it on the ground. But marking off the contours is only the first stage in a much bigger operation. The next stage requires a lot of willing helpers. And this is where Bernard Lidea's organisers come in. They bring the local people together and put the problem to them. Then they try to think of some practical solutions.
That the pig di seaside silemba, that the pig nin bui de fan basin sak wati na ta bati jem tara king taura. I don't know me siri sak e ki tum ne jam sari in teka.
La alhamdulillah when la shi zai barkinga ay tum da som zam san taban pagaba zam sa taban kumbia ay tar ku ko bale ay ne mama patar ko ay pu de barkane kende.
Now the next stage in the project can begin, and everyone can take part in this. First, they have to collect large stones and carry them over to where the contour lines have been marked. Gradually, the stones begin to form a low wall along the contour. With a lot of willing hands, the walls are soon built. Smaller stones are used to fill the gaps. Now, when the rains come, the walls will prevent the rainwater from flooding across the surface and washing the topsoil away.
If you don't build these walls, when it does rain, all the water runs away. So the benefit is lost. We build walls so that when the crops grow, they get water. We know it works. Look, you build a wall in a small area first, and I bet you find you produce a better crop there than anywhere else. That's why we build them, so we can have a good harvest as we used to.
Farmers are quick to realize how essential this technique is to their survival. The owner of this farm has built stone walls along the contours all over his land. After only one rainy season, he's worked out that he's getting a little more millet from his land than he did before. The walls, built to hold the water back, have also helped to retain the valuable topsoil in his fields. In Yatanga province, the groups formed by Bernard Ledea are doing something positive to reduce the effects of drought and erosion. Bernard Ledea doesn't believe their problems can be solved simply by foreign aid.
Foreign aid does help towards solving the problem, but the real solutions are in the hands of the people. The peasant is the man who is responsible for his territory, and he should try to find a solution. He should feel responsible for the problems and take action. Then if foreign aid arrives, it will become a useful tool. But when money arrives without the peasant being prepared, both psychologically and morally prepared, then aid often proves useless. But if the peasant is trained, is committed, and is prepared both psychologically and morally, the aid can be a positive help in the fight against desertification.
If you'd like an order form for the notes that accompany the series, then please ring this 24-hour number, 081 991 8031, 081 991 8031. The teachers may be interested to know that 5 programmes investigating the English language begin tomorrow morning at 9:05. The first programme looks at language in society and shows how individuals and schools deal with the various kinds of language that shape their world. That's Teaching Today, Language in the National Curriculum, tomorrow morning at 9:05, and it's followed at 9:35 with Super Sense, fascinating series that looks at the secret sensory world of animals. Tomorrow's programme, Sixth Sense, is at 9:35 here on 2. The new BBC Education primary and secondary annual programme packages should now be in your school. You can't miss them. They're bright and colourful, filled with everything you need to know about radio and television broadcasts for 1991 to 2. There are plenty of new programmes reflecting the requirements of the national curriculum for both primary and secondary education across all subjects. For teachers, there's support for many aspects of teaching today. If you'd like copies, please contact BBC Education Information on that number, 081 991 8031. In just under 5 minutes, we've secondary technology in Teaching Today.